Hey, Cody.
Yeah.
Can you just pick up the pace just a little bit, please? Dude, I could walk backwards faster than this.
That's not the point, is to walk faster. Didn't we have this conversation already?
When Dual Survival aired, fans were hooked by the extreme environments, clashing styles, and off-the-charts tension. But what viewers didn't know was that the real battle wasn't against nature. It was between co-stars Cody Lundin and Teti. Why did Discovery suddenly cut Cody? Why did Joe accuse Cody of endangering lives, and vice versa? And how did it all spiral into one of the most toxic off-screen feuds in survival show history? Get ready. We're exposing the shocking truth behind the scenes. The tension from day one. When Dual Survival first introduced Cody Lundin and Teti, the casting seemed like a stroke of genius, or madness. On one side, Cody, the soft-spoken, barefoot survivalist who embraced primitive living and holistic methods. On the other hand, Joe, a military-trained operative with a background in special forces, intense discipline, and zero tolerance for what he saw as bad protocol. The contrast was clear, and so was the friction. But what viewers didn't see in the polished episodes was just how deep and immediate that tension really ran. From day one, the production leaned into the opposites attract formula. But Cody and Joe didn't attract. They collided. Joe later admitted that during the first season, he wasn't confident. New to the camera and learning on the job, he mostly let Cody take the lead, even when they disagreed. Cody, with years of on-screen experience and a calm, methodical pace, naturally assumed control in most scenarios. Joe didn't push back, at first. But everything shifted in Season 2. Joe's confidence had caught up. No longer the quiet learner, he began confronting Cody, on camera and off. The result? Tension that crackled in every scene. Arguments about what to eat, how to move, and even how to build shelters turned vicious. According to Joe, by the time they were gearing up for the infamous Norway shoot, their working relationship had deteriorated completely. Producers saw the friction as a gold mine, with conflict equating to drama, and drama equating to ratings. He continues to say that the producers would sometimes engineer discussions so that he would provoke Cody for the sake of creating tension. One of their first few big arguments, he says, was scripted. The cameras were like, ready. Lines were fed to them. Hence, the duality of Dual Survival was transitioning from survival into a spectacle. That tension wasn't harmless, though. Joe and Cody were not actors. They were two men in the wilderness, depending on each other to be safe from any danger. The more the issues went deeper, the less they trusted each other. In Joe's eyes, the instigated brawls started to become real. Cody would question his craft. Joe would then bring down the hammer. Neither would back down. All that considered, Joe did not discredit Cody's knowledge. In fact, he went so far as to say, Cody Lundin is, when it comes to primitive survival, in the top 3 in the world. Where he felt it appropriate, he gave credit to Cody's skill and years of experience. But he admired the guy all he wanted, and this did not lessen his irritation. He felt that Cody's teaching was unorthodox, to the point of becoming dangerous if copied by viewers who didn't understand the underlying risks. The tension, however, grew. The arguing got loud, and by the beginning of Season 3, Joe was actually threatening some very real consequences for Cody should he step over certain lines. He even claims to have told Cody on the plane to Norway, "If you show up in shorts, I'm going to pound you into the ground like a tent peg." That is not something someone should say to a friend for life. What pushed Joe to threaten his co-star before the cameras even started rolling? And what did Cody do that turned the cold Norwegian air into the most volatile episode they'd ever filmed? Norway meltdown. The most infamous moment in dual survival history didn't happen in a jungle, desert, or swamp. It happened in Norway, on a freezing, wind-blasted mountain surrounded by snowdrifts and icy air that could slay a person in hours. And what ignited the explosion between Cody Lundin and Joe Teti? A pair of shorts. Yes, shorts. Cody showed up in sub-zero Norway temperatures wearing multiple layers of socks and shorts. To the average viewer, it looked bizarre. To Joe Teti, it was infuriating because, in his view, this wasn't a quirky wardrobe choice. It was a dangerous misrepresentation of survival reality. Joe's side of the story? He warned Cody not to do it. On the plane ride to Norway, he told him point blank, "If you show up in shorts, I'm going to pound you into the ground like a tent peg." This wasn't hyperbole. Joe was dead serious. He saw Cody's decision as reckless, an act of branding over survival integrity. To Joe, it was the equivalent of encouraging viewers, including impressionable kids, to try surviving harsh climates with the wrong gear. The cameras might have been rolling, but for Joe, this wasn't just TV. This was real life, and someone could get hurt. But Cody didn't back down. His defense? He wasn't just putting on a show. That's how he lived. In the desert heat of Arizona, he often walked barefoot and wore minimal gear. This wasn't a costume. It was a lifestyle. And even in Norway, he had a rationale. The outer layers of socks froze, creating insulation, while inner layers retained warmth. It was textbook Cody, unconventional, rooted in deep knowledge of primitive survival methods. Joe didn't buy that, though. He thought Cody had taken his brand, the barefoot minimum gear survivalist, a little too far. This was no longer about teaching survival skills as far as Joe was concerned. This was about ego, identity, and optics. As he put it, "That's not good protocol. Are you going to tell someone to go in the snow with shorts on? No, I'm not going to do it." Worse yet, he seemed to have no idea, or didn't care, how much it affected young viewers, Joe murmured. Joe pictured the worst of the worst. A parent calling the network, saying their child lost his feet after doing a scene on TV instead. Joe told Cody that he says, was met with a chilling response. Bad parenting. And that was the last straw for Joe. It was no longer creative tension. It was an all-out war from then on. The Norway episode will go down as the fracture point. On screen, Joe was furious. Cody was very calm, some said almost smug. But behind the scenes, panic arose from the production crew's knowledge that this was not just some run-of-the-mill TV spat. This was the collapsing final breaths of a partnership that had begun to be held together with chewing gum and string. One man focused on protocol and evacuation procedures. The other concerned himself with long-term survival and sincerity. They were both experts, but neither could bend without breaking the principles they stood on. All the viewers were shown was a fraction of that confrontation, edited, trimmed, and pieced together to fit into the runtime. But Joe insists that the TV edit was but a small slice of an incredible drama. The yelling, the bitterness, and the refusal to compromise went far deeper than any of that which made it to the airwaves. And it didn't even stop there. What happened after Norway was even more intense, and it exposed a deep rift between production, survival philosophy, and the two men who were never meant to be partners. Discovery's dirty hands. Behind every feud on reality TV, there's a quiet puppet master pulling strings. And in the case of dual survival, many insiders say that the puppet master was the Discovery Channel itself. While Joe Teti and Cody Lundin's rivalry seemed raw and spontaneous, there's mounting evidence that the network not only knew what was happening, but actively encouraged it. The first red flag? The so-called fake conversation that opened Joe's tenure on the show. According to him, before real filming ever began, the producers asked him and Cody to have a staged argument. Not a survival scenario, not a teaching moment, just conflict. Manufactured tension. Joe claims this wasn't about education at all. It was a clear signal from the network. This show is about drama now. But things didn't stop there. During their actual survival shoots, producers allegedly leaned into the tension. When Cody showed up in shorts for the Norway episode, despite Joe's direct warning, the cameras didn't stop. They rolled silently, waiting for the explosion. Joe recalls saying on the plane, "If you show up like that, I'll pound you into the ground like a tent peg." Everyone knew conflict was brewing, but instead of intervening for safety, the producers let it play out. Why? Because drama meant ratings. Multiple accounts now suggest that Discovery was well aware of the toxic environment building between the co-hosts, but instead of cooling it down, they poured gasoline on the fire. The goal wasn't to build chemistry, it was to build conflict. Two survivalists with opposed philosophies, military precision versus holistic minimalism, became their golden formula for controversy. Particularly, Cody got rubbed to high friction against what he termed production manipulation. In infrequent public statements, he accused the network of setting up scenes and giving false impressions of safety and editing footage to make him look like the oddball while Joe played along as the hardened realist. Not only did he think that things were not good for him, but he also felt that he was betrayed. In 2014, tensions boiled over. In the middle of a season, Cody was fired suddenly, and fans had only their imaginations to offer speculation about what happened. But behind the scenes, Cody had allegedly raised serious concerns about unsafe production practices. Concerns quietly swept under the rug. Later, he dropped a bomb in a Facebook post, accusing Discovery of production over reality, making situations, ignoring protocol, and misleading viewers about what was actually happening out there in the wilderness. Joe does not disagree that production had an effect on the narrative. In interviews, he has maintained that sometimes it's the scenes that were most dramatic, but not necessarily the most dangerous, that were the toughest. He claims that, although it wasn't totally scripted, producers would know exactly how to instigate a little tension. In his words, "We weren't filming Housewives of Atlanta. We were freezing our asses off in the wild." Still, that rugged landscape was rife with manipulation. At its heart, it was a battle between two men, survival knowledge versus a reality TV empire's interests. And for Cody Lundin, that conflict became a personal war. He was not just aggrieved about what took place in front of the camera. He felt that the Discovery Channel had sullied his reputation and sullied his survival philosophy, and, perhaps worst of all, actually put people in danger. But Cody wouldn't stay silent, and the shocking move he made next would take his feud with Discovery and Joe to a whole new level. When survival gets real. At first glance, Dual Survival was just another rugged outdoors show. Two guys with opposing methods dropped into harsh environments to demonstrate how to survive. But behind the camera, something far more dangerous was unfolding. The risk wasn't just exposure, dehydration, or starvation. It was the silent danger no one talked about, the kind that producers didn't plan for, and that nearly destroyed the hosts from the inside out. Cody Lundin didn't come to the show as an entertainer. He was already a respected survival instructor, known for his barefoot approach and commitment to teaching self-reliance in the most authentic way possible. Joe Teti, meanwhile, was a former military operator trained in combat survival. Their methods clashed, yes, But what united them was the reality of how brutal the fieldwork truly was. According to Joe, the shoot conditions were punishing. In Wyoming, temperatures dropped to 36 degrees below zero without factoring in wind chill. In Norway, the wind howled as night crept in faster than they could build shelter. And in remote deserts, dehydration became a constant threat. What audiences never saw was the toll it took on their bodies and their minds. "I didn't want to be in the desert. I wanted to get gone," Joe said in an interview. Because every extra day spent exposed meant your body broke down faster. Fatigue, hallucinations, organ stress. And all the while, they were expected to teach survival, perform to camera, and never break the illusion. To make things worse, both hosts agreed that there was no guarantee for safety. Sure, they would have an EMT around, but not really close. In many cases, it could take about 30 minutes or more to get any medical help. On one snowed-in shoot, Joe just barely had time to change his clothes from diarrhea. Sometimes he didn't make it. That was not really gross-out TV. It was filming a guy on the edge. Cody was repeatedly raising red flags. He'd refused to go along with production choices, strongly arguing that some scenarios were just unnecessarily reckless. One day, he was furious that they would be asked to wade through icy cold water without safety nets. For a guy teaching controlled survival, it had to be a nightmare. But the pressure didn't only come from nature, it came from the network. Cody thought that for Discovery, crossing the line between a demo and actual danger seemed like a fair trade-off for good footage. It was there that he began to draw the line with Joe, not over gear, not over philosophy, but over what they were being put through for entertainment. Joe, however, was no stranger to the discomforts of his job. He came from a background of elite military operations where risk was a daily reality, but even he conceded that some of what they were subjected to was unnecessary. "We're not shooting Housewives of Atlanta," he once said. "We're in Mother Nature at her worst." It was not a scripted drama, but survival all the way. Raw, real, and occasionally reckless. One of the crucial concerns? The psychological wearing down of it. The audience saw fights. What they didn't see was the emotional breakdown behind the scenes. Joe admitted he was almost broken by the show. "You get to a point of no return," he said. "You're not dead, but you're like a dying cockroach." Giddy. He felt nauseous. He felt weak. And yet he was expected to keep going because the cameras never stopped. Cody eventually reached that breaking point. He was tired of fighting the environment and the production, tired of warning about protocols only to be ignored. And when he finally snapped, when he refused to keep pretending the danger wasn't real, that's when his exit was sealed. Cody's survival code versus Joe's escape doctrine. At the heart of the dual survival feud wasn't just ego or attitude, it was a fundamental clash between two philosophies of survival. Cody Lundin's minimalist, earth-connected methodology couldn't have been more different from Joe Teti's military-driven, mission-first mindset. And once the show tried to force them to work together, the collision was inevitable and explosive. Cody believed in surviving where you are. His entire teaching ethos revolved around adaptation, conservation of energy, and respecting the natural environment. He practiced what he preached, too, often going barefoot, wearing shorts, and relying on firecraft, sheltering techniques, and an encyclopedic knowledge of primitive survival. To him, slowing down was often the key to survival. Joe Teti, on the other hand, saw survival as a race against time. His training in special forces emphasized evasion, movement, and rapid extraction. He believed the longer you stayed in a bad situation, the higher the risk of death. To Joe, survival was about escape, not endurance. Every scenario was an objective to complete, a mission to finish, not a life to study and absorb. This wasn't just a difference in gear or pace, it was a philosophical war. Take, for example, the infamous Norway episode. Cody, true to form, arrived in sub-zero conditions wearing shorts because he understood the science of insulation layering and internal body heat. Joe, dressed in tactical winter gear, was furious. He believed Cody was setting a dangerous precedent for viewers, especially younger ones who might emulate what they saw on screen. Joe even warned Cody on the plane, "If you show up in Norway in shorts, I'm going to pound you into the ground like a tent peg." That wasn't just a threat. It was the boiling point of a feud that had been simmering for seasons. Cody's defense? That his gear worked, had been tested, and was consistent with what he taught in the field. Joe's rebuttal? It was irresponsible branding. Cody considered Joe to be reckless, a man who was always charging ahead. Joe thought Cody was delusional, too comfortable with discomfort. And right there in the middle were the audience members, witnessing a pair of survival experts argue not just about methods, but to embody different worldviews. One who believed in just sitting with nature, the other who thought he would rather outmaneuver it. Their dissensions weren't just academic, they shaped the entire rhythm of the show. In one episode, Joe wanted to move fast out of a desert zone, afraid of exposure and dehydration, whereas Cody wanted to slow down, build shade, and conserve water. Things heated up. Joe thought like a soldier behind enemy lines. Cody thought like a desert nomad. They both had reasonable arguments but could not agree on a course of action. The result? Chaos, anxiety, and some of the greatest meltdowns in the history of the show. The actual trouble was that Discovery wanted the tension. It led to some compelling television, and the more clashes, the better the numbers. But behind the two men were learning to loathe one another, not just as personalities, but as representatives. All believed wrong about the other person's approach. Eventually, Cody got tired of being called the weirdo. He wasn't off improvising or flaunting an ego. He was simply true to his education, science, and years of real-world experience. To Joe, though, it was insulting that his elite military pedigree was always questioned or contradicted. Neither man would back down. By the end of Season 2, the damage was irreparable. What Dual Survival had created, intentionally or not, was a thematic clash of survival cultures. One based on connection, one based on conquest, and neither was willing to yield. But what happened off-screen after the feud escalated would take the drama to an entirely different level. And Cody's shocking next move would flip the spotlight back on Discovery itself. Cody breaks his silence. For years, Cody Lundin kept mostly quiet about what really went down behind the scenes of Dual Survival. While fans speculated and footage revealed heated exchanges, Cody took the high road, choosing to walk away rather than fan the flames. But in time, the silence became deafening. And when he finally decided to speak up, the truth was far darker than anyone expected. The public knew something had changed when Cody vanished from the show in 2014, replaced with no warning or clarity. Discovery Channel gave the usual vague line, "Creative differences." But Cody, in a rare and calculated move, publicly claimed that he had been fired against his will. It wasn't a departure. And then came his stunning accusation. He had been removed because he raised safety concerns on set. According to Cody, Dual Survival producers were putting ratings above realism, and worse, above the safety of both hosts and the crew. He claimed scenes were staged, scenarios manipulated, and that Discovery pressured him to engage in unsafe practices simply for the sake of more drama. In a detailed Facebook post that gained viral traction, Cody stated, "I was fired from dual survival because I was trying to keep myself and others safe. It became clear that Discovery wanted someone who followed orders, not someone who followed survival protocol." Fans were shocked, but it didn't stop there. He exposed that, in one specific episode, producers attempted to portray him as mentally unwell, editing footage in a way that distorted the reality of their interactions. Cody claimed the network tried to make it look like he was having a breakdown to justify removing him, despite knowing full well that it was his refusal to follow unsafe directives that had sparked the conflict. Cody meticulously laid out occasion after occasion on which he raised flags. The ridiculous scenarios, the misleading survival hacks, the continued growing dependence on conflict direction script. In his view, dual survival had become a spectacle. Survival was a minor detail. The price he refused to pay was the exposure of his integrity, or the chance a viewer might put into practice one of the dangerous procedures presented this season. Possibly most revealing were his comments concerning Joe Teti's background. Cody claimed he was concerned about Joe's conduct, accusations of aggression, physical intimidation, and a reckless disregard of accepted survival strategy in the real world. He did not call out Joe on all counts, but fans made their own deductions quickly. Cody said in one interview, "When you're in remote locations with someone who refuses to consider the risks, and worse, someone who sees everything like a mission instead of a survival scenario, it becomes dangerous, not just for you, but for the crew too." He also disclosed that he had put many of these complaints in writing to producers and Discovery executives, but instead of addressing them, they fired him. The plan went wrong. Cody had received a great and loyal audience over the years from teaching, writing, and giving lectures. His character had been built not just among television viewers, but also academically, professionally, and worldwide. When he finally broke the silence, there was a storm of thousands rallying to his defense. Fans inundated Discovery's social media pages and waged an online war for answers. Survivalists and educators spoke out in defense of Cody's version. The last word from Cody on the matter was both poignant and scathing. "I didn't sign up to play a character. I signed up to teach people how not to die." His exit became a turning point. While dual survival limped forward with a series of new hosts and rotating substitutes, the soul of the show, the balance between real survival education and entertainment, was gone. And for many fans, so was the trust. But even after exposing the truth, Cody wasn't interested in vengeance. He had returned to teaching, writing, and engaging with students, making sure people understood why he left and who really transformed dual survival into a battlefield seemed the only aim in his life. And while Cody walked away with his reputation intact, Joe Teti's time in the spotlight was about to implode under scrutiny of its own. The fallout. After the dust settled and the feuding hosts exited dual survival, fans were left wondering, what happened to Cody Lundin and Joe Teti after the cameras stopped rolling? Their feud had become one of the most infamous behind-the-scenes sagas in survival television history, and the aftermath was just as telling as the conflict itself. Let's start with Cody Lundin. Once dismissed as the barefoot hippie by critics, he re-emerged from the controversy with his reputation stronger than ever. Unlike many reality stars, Cody had built his name long before TV. He returned to doing what he did best, teaching survival as a science, not a stunt. Cody resumed classes at his renowned Aboriginal Living Skills School in Arizona, which he'd been running since 1991. His workshops filled quickly, attracting everyone from everyday outdoor enthusiasts to elite military units seeking unconventional wilderness skills. He also returned to writing and speaking engagements, using his platform to highlight not only survival tactics, but also media manipulation and the ethics of reality television. In a revealing interview, Cody said, "Television taught me the difference between being famous and being credible. I choose credibility." He never went back to mainstream TV. But that was by design. Cody made it clear, the survival world was his real arena, and he'd rather teach one honest student in the desert than perform for 1 million misinformed viewers. To this day, he remains a respected voice in the global survivalist community. Meanwhile, Joe Teti's post-show path was more controversial and far less steady. Despite his tough guy image on Dual Survival, Joe's military record soon came under scrutiny. Several military watchdogs and veteran forums began questioning the accuracy of his stated credentials, particularly his claims of serving in classified operations with elite units. In 2014, the Military Times and Stolen Valor investigators began publishing articles about inconsistencies in Joe's biography. While he had served honorably, some of his most dramatic claims, especially those regarding Tier 1 operations, lacked corroborating records. It raised serious questions not just about his resume, but also about how much the Discovery Channel had verified before casting him. But the controversy didn't end there. In 2015, reports surfaced that Joe threatened a person on the crew of Dual Survival while they were filming, allegedly telling him he would disappear in the woods. Insiders maintain that the matter became serious enough for the Discovery Network to pull him from the show after Season 6, despite supporting him initially during the Cody conflict. His departure was never explained publicly. No goodbye episode, no official adieu. Just an inconspicuous crossing off the list of future shows, followed by nothing. Since then, Joe Teti seems to have vanished from the limelight. Social networking became less important to him, and he has not made any major attempts to return to the television world. Some claim he went back to private contracting. Some say that the fallout from Dual Survival and the Stolen Valor controversy rendered him toxic in both the survivalist and veteran communities. The show Dual Survival itself received some hurt in that. It did have a rotating cast of new hosts, such as Matt Graham and Grady Powell, and others for a few more seasons, but the series was never able to replicate the magic of the original. Audience engagement found a dwindling storehouse, and even with all the constant changes, it was clear. The cracks had already begun appearing under it. By 2016, this was quietly cancelled as Dual Survival. What began as an exciting blend of primitive wisdom and tactical grit ultimately buckled under the weight of ego, meddling by production, and chaos behind the scenes. And in the end, the very feud that made must-see television out of the show sealed its fate. Nowadays, Dual Survival survives only on reruns and YouTube clips, made famous, most notably, by the one featuring the Norway confrontation. The real legacy, however, lies in the cracked careers and the parts it unearthed. Cody Lundin is still a highly respected survival instructor, author, and educator. Joe Teti remains a cautionary tale about unchecked egos and blurred lines between fact and fiction. And as for fans, a lesson no less important than any survival tip lay in store for them. Not everything on television is as real as it seems when survival becomes a show. Reality now turned upside down. The question does not just boil down to who was right or wrong. Alas, it also questions what happens when reality TV forgets the reality, and the people behind it refuse to remain silent. If you made it this far, you know the truth is messier than Discovery ever let on. So, whose side are you on? Team Cody or Team Joe? Drop your take in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and catch our next deep dive into the stories they'd rather you forget.